Chapter 15, Trematoda, Form and Function of Digeninians. Part 1, Overview. When you look at the life cycle here of the Trematoda, what you see is a series of developmental stages. There's going to be larval stages, juvenile stages, and adult stages. Passing out of the vertebrate, the majority of the organisms the trematodes will be talking about in this section will be using us, mammals, as the host. We will pass out eggs, generally eggs in the feces. The eggs will then hatch. You'll see the Miracidium. Miracidium, which will swim. They are motile. They will swim and attach to and then penetrate into the intermediate host. Generally, the intermediate host is going to be some form of a snail. Once in the snail, Miracidium will go through stages of development: sporocyst, rhidea, depending upon tomato. The rhidea will release cells which will then exit out of the snail host to become free-living cercaria. The cercaria, which are highly motile, just like the Miracidium, will swim and search for the definitive host, which they will then attach to, penetrate into, and go about swimming in. So, roughly we're going to see for all the trematodes, there's going to be about 6-ish steps to their life cycle stages. Some of them may have, slightly modified steps here. Some of them may not have all of these steps. But this is the general life cycle we're going to look at. Keeping in mind that we're talking free-living, free-swimming larvae. Okay, keep in mind, again, we are not discussing single-cell organisms anymore. Even the Miracidium that looks like it's a ciliated protist is actually millions, if not billions, of cells in size. And what we think of as, the little ciliated appendages is actually projections from individual cells that are aiding in movement. The sporocyst that's inside the snail, which is acting as an intermediate host for the further larvae in the beginning of the juvenile development stages. The sporocyst is like a sac-like organism. Inside of it will be the next generation of organisms. It will house, feed, protect many organisms within it. Its subsequent progeny of sorts. The sporocyst will then further develop into rhidea. These rhidea will, help aid in the further development of those internal, genetically identical, but still internal organisms. Those internal organisms are going to be housed and fed by the rhidea. The rhidea, which has its own pharynx, it has its own gut, it takes in nutrients that it's stealing, parasitizing from the intermediate host, the snail. Those organisms inside the rhidea will slowly develop, become cercaria. Cercaria will then exit out the Rhydea and will then burst out of the snail. Cercaria, as we're going to see in later lectures of this chapter, are all going to have, different morphologies depending upon which genus species you're referring to. But they are all highly motile, and you're generally going to see a tail or some form of a forked tail at least. Cercaria, for some of the genus species, will then swim up concentration gradients until they come into contact with us, the definitive host. We're standing in water. We're standing in a stream, a pond, a rice paddy if you're in, Southeast Asia. As we're going to see in later lectures, Cercaria are going to have glands at the anterior tip that allow for them to penetrate the epidermis and the dermal layers, get into the subcutaneous layers, and then be able to swim and get through the rest of the tissues and wind up at their tropic host tissues, host organs that they seem to have a preference for. Now, the Metacercaria that you see here, also mentioned, some of these organisms, the different genus species, some of them are not going to go Cercaria directly to definitive host. There's going to be this in between. Cercaria is going to swim and attach to maybe some aquatic plant material. There, it no longer needs to be motile, so it'll attach, and it will further develop into the Metacercaria. The Metacercaria, which can then come into contact with the definitive host, penetrate the dermis, epidermis, and all of that, or it can be ingested. Some animal comes along and eats the aquatic plants. This now is ingested and is now inside the definitive host.